I'm not certain if this is recording or not. It now tells me that it is recording. I'm sorry about this. This is my third attempt to do Chess Comedy Books 7. Last time, as you recall, we did Chess Comedy Books 6, in which I showed a number of coffee table books which throw more emphasis on the photographs and the gloss rather than the accuracy or the actual moves or the chessboards. Now today, I'm going to do something special. I'm going to show you a few histories of chess. Now, not that one here, but this one. This is a very respected history of chess, but it combines an element, hence the fact I'm doing it now, of the coffee table, because it has large emphasis on the pictorial. Starts out with the origin of chess with Harry Golombek, the author. Perhaps I should have said that before now. There he is, the late Harry Golombek from Buckinghamshire, quoting Richard Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy. Chess play is a good and witty exercise of the mind for some kinds of men, and fit for such melancholic persons, oh, that's me, as are idle and have impertinent thoughts or troubled with cares, nothing better to distract their minds and alter their meditations. Invented, some say, by the general of an army in a famine to keep his soldiers from mutiny. Well, if you believe that, you'll believe anything, but it was written by Richard Burton, who about 400 years later twice married Elizabeth Taylor. So I can't help thinking it's not the same bloke. Harry proceeds to go through the history, some of which, of course, we know about, and some of which, of course, we don't. Then he shows you how the pieces move, and then he shows you some gaming taking place in Egypt. There they are, presumably a couple of pharaohs or kings. Perhaps pharaohs are kings, actually, I'm not sure. With gaming pieces, having a game in the pyramids. But it says it's not chess. It's taken from 1,250 years before Christ. And here we have two animals playing something else, which probably will be told in a minute isn't chess. There they are. Hoof and mouse. It's a satirical drawing from the period of the New Kingdom. I don't know when that is, but I imagine it's about the same concurrently with the other one I just showed you. And here is an ancient game. It looks like Go, but it might not be. In the Chess Hall of Moscow, one of the young stars. And it also shows you Chinese chess. And then it shows you Go. The group of people in the background are playing Chinese river game in this scene by the Japanese artists Hokusai. And he had quite a long life, 1760 to 1849. There's a quote from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. I'm sure you're forever dusting that off. And it quotes the poetry. Here we have the Mongols, unmistakable as the Mongols. What that's got to do with chess, once again, I don't know. But here's an elephant. And on the back of the elephant, what can you see? What can you see? I'll tell you what you can see. You can see two people. It's a finely carved ivory king of an antique Indian chess set in Delhi. And Harry continues to explain about Chaturang, the theorists and masters. They had a position, even if they themselves didn't play chess competitively or even know that much about it, and they would set it up on a board and they would give it to somebody like you were offering them lunch on a plate or giving your cat some food to eat. He's not going to tip it over. You give somebody a chess position and you say, who's winning? I'll bet you whatever the currency is. In that way, you can put together a little money, but you don't have to reveal the solution if you don't want to. Here we have interesting development. We have tabia. I think that's where on old-fashioned typewriters you would see tabs. I mean, tabia. Now, these positions, you'll notice there's no opposing armies, or in two of them there aren't so many opposing armies. They just simply put themselves into a formation, like the red arrows or what you will. So there is dynamism there, and it would have taken a little time. But the point I'm making is a modern player doesn't think like that. You don't make patterns predetermined. You respond to what your opponent's doing, and it's like a game of table tennis or what you will. A, B, B, A, B, C. You do not just go into a sort of little huddle and hope, the world goes away. If you do, and we all do it from time to time, you won't get it very far. All things have their time, all wishes predetermined end. Chameleon-coloured fortune shows many a varied face. We are chessmen in their hands, and the king may fall to a lowly pawn. Take no care for this world, or the men will live in it. For now the world is left without men worthy of the name. A bit melancholic, isn't it? Where that came from? 1091. So 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, they weren't that cheerful. Here's more positions of the sort I explained before. And here a well-known double act from the game of chess. Sacus Ludus, the game Saccorum, translated and printed by Caxton, the 15th century. This was one of the first engravings. I'll show it to you. It's nothing to write home about. And it is fairly well known. There it is. You may very well have seen it before. Once again, I expect that's featured on the cover of many chess books and chess magazines and all sorts of stuff. Caxton was the printer, he wasn't the author. I'm racing ahead here. Here's something I showed in an earlier little gathering that we had. This is not such a good one, of the two guys in the tent and playing on a chessboard that's obviously out of scale. Presumably, they may have actually drawn the board, and then somebody said, I think you better sort of put in a little pomp and circumstance. So they drew the tent around it and put up. Now, here are some old friends. Probably the work of the Vikings. And there is one of the most celebrated chess sets in the world. These are the Lewis chessmen. Some of the Isle of Lewis chessmen in the British Museum, a rook, a knight, and another rook. The set is the oldest known to be still in existence. I think that's rather splendid, and that actually has been an Isle of Lewis Grandmaster tournament with Polgar and Nigel Short and Jonathan Rowson, I think. So how about that? How about that indeed? Here we are, lurching into the 18th century. Various books start to be printed. And here is somebody showing off, as I'm now doing, except I can't do that. He is playing blindfold chess, and he has literally got, like Blind Man's Buff, he's literally got the blindfold aslant his eyes. And it is Philidor. And he is in Parslows, which was a coffee house, I think you could say, a London coffee house, in 1784. And various people are challenging him, and no doubt kicking up a rumpus. And here we have a very medieval, completely without perspective, but with lots of flavour gathering. And at the bottom of the picture, unmistakably wobbling about a chessboard. let's see, it looks like Tudors and Stuarts to me. It's by Van Leyden. I was right in the dates, 1794. So the Tudors were well ensconced on the throne by then in our little country, our little kingdom, to 1533. Well, I think the Tudors pegged out about 1603, so they had another 70 years to go. Meanwhile, here is the game going on between various people who are either advising or just running into the scene and wanting to be in the painting. Now here's Harry giving games by Staunton, Howard Staunton, the famous English player from London, 1851, which was one of the first, not the first, I don't think, international chess tournament. Certainly the first that was of any strength. And here we have, who's this gentleman here? I'll give you a clue. He has Irish blood in him. He was a Creole, though, and he was from America. So there's three conflicting pieces of information. Who do you think it was? I'm not going to tell you. Here's a little man. I will tell you who that is. With the beard, it's Steinitz. At some future point, actually I was going to do it today, but at some future point we will have a little gathering talking about Steinitz, because he was the first world chess champion, and for that reason alone we owe him our respect. And here is Steinitz with some of his colleagues from 1886. So by then he was well on his way in this world. And here is Lasker. You may remember I did a little talk about Lasker. Well, there he is. Can you see him? He's got his hand against his face, and he is masking a little bit of his black moustache. And there's a few cigar smokers there, and he looks intent on concentration. Bottles, as they call it, of concentration. There's a nice set. You might not like the fact it's made out of ivory. But the fact remains that is a nice set and a decent photograph. It's a European chessman. The white pieces of bone, of black, are horn. I would have thought horn was bone, but anyway, just shows as usual. I don't know what I'm talking about. Just skipping through. Here are some Oriental pieces. I haven't checked their origins. Very ornate. And I don't suppose you'd use these for playing with. And you certainly wouldn't give them to your children so they could play with them or even throw them around. These are just for decoration. And what could be nicer? We're coming up to date now. Capablanca and the Hypermoderns. Capablanca, I don't really think was a hypermodern, but he played many people that were. Now you remember I showed a picture when I was doing the chess magazines of the little girl Linda Bott collecting a prize in about 1960, and the gentleman she was collecting it from, here he is again, with the white hair, playing Frank Marshall. It is in fact the Englishman Sir George Thomas. George Thomas was a fine sportsman, a fine gentleman. He wouldn't have dreamt of analysing a position at the adjournment stage. And at the conclusion of the book, Harry, of course, brings up Fischer Spassky, and so he should. Here's a picture of the lady world champion, Vera Menchik, and look at that for scholarship. Very nice index, a bibliography to conclude. The next book I'm going to look at didn't really receive too much publicity. There it is. It's called Chess, The History of a Game by Richard Eales. Richard was a lecturer in Kent University in Canterbury And in 1970, he came second equal in the British Championship in Coventry. But unfortunately, ill health and also the fact that he probably was concentrating on his work and his life and his wife, who was at one time, well, she still is actually, Ray-Keane's sister. Mr. Eales is lecturer in history, and that's from the University of Kent. I've just said that. He is also a chess player of distinction and an accomplished author, because in 1973 he collaborated with A.H. Williams on a book about what? The Alekhine defense. But we are a world away from the Alekhine defense now. We are looking at the history of the game. This is a 1985 book, which has been reprinted. They're not really probably enough. The book is dedicated to my parents. Why study the history of chess? The obvious task for most chess writers when they look at the past is to study the growth of skill in chess playing. The thing was, chess traveled around because merchants took it, armies took it. Monarchs probably wanted to be associated with it if they even knew what it was. If there wasn't an equivalent, they would probably have somebody in the court who played, and no doubt wouldn't dream of beating His Highness or even Her Highness. But if they did, as Ruy Lopez did to Ferdinand and Isabel, who were, amongst others, the sponsors of Christopher Columbus. And there we have, Ray-Keane will be so grateful to hear this, there we have a link with the New World. And already it's 1492, and Columbus is setting sail. And before we know it, he gets to the other side, and the first thing he says to the Indians when he gets there is, "Okay, you lot, who wants a game of chess?" Well, maybe I'm pulling your leg. This is a book which is written by an academic, and he hasn't placed huge emphasis on photographs or diagrams. In fact, I can't find anything apart from his text. The symbolic game of the Middle Ages. About 10,000 AD, chess was introduced into Western Europe, and Europe was the cradle of the future development for most of the next 1,000 years. Well, Richard Eales, I can't argue with that. I really can't. Eastern Europe, I might modify what you're saying, and I might also stick in Russia, the old style USSR. And I would also mention China for the 21st century, and I'd be a fool not to. They are massing. And it mentions a book we're going to come up with in a minute, The History by H.J.R. Murray, which was published about 108 years ago, but it's still worth reading. Eales is sloshing around in olden times here. And then suddenly we are coming to the Middle Ages. Not coming particularly rapidly to the Middle Ages, but we are coming to the Middle Ages. At chess with me, she 'gan to play with her false daughters, divers. She style on me and taught my first. I think that means advisor, which is the equivalent of queen, I think. And when I saw my first away, alas, I could no longer play, but said, "Farewell, sweet, yes, and farewell at that ever there was." This is, it's Chaucer, written to commemorate the death of Blanche, Duchess of Lancaster in 1369. So there it is by Geoffrey Chaucer. Good old Jeff. I didn't know there was a reference to chess in Chaucer's writings. I would have looked it up before now. So there we are. I didn't. Between 1475 and 1650, chapter 3, the new chess and its patrons. In other words, they wanted a bit of money. I soldier on. And what do I find? What do I find? It seems to liken chess to something that would be played by intellectuals. Now, why do I doubt that? There's some chess pieces. Oh, as if they're made of leather as opposed to bone or ivory or what you will. They're probably 11th century. And here's our old mates. Aghast. The Lewis chessmen I mentioned before. There they are again. Richard Eales gives a date for this between 1150 and 1170. That's quite brave, actually, to come within 20 years, isn't it? Of something which would be absolutely dug out of the very crust. And here's an example of how games of chess were first described. In narrative form, not in notation, and not using sufficient abbreviations. The white pawn moves two houses. Black's the fame, obviously the same. White's king's bishop pawn, 2 houses. Black's queen's pawn, 2 houses. When they say house, they mean squares. And when they say black pawn, they mean black pawn. So it's pretty obvious. The beginnings of popularity, he takes it from the start of the 19th century up to the outbreak of the First World War. More talking about Staunton, who became famous at the time for eluding the challenge of Morphy, who came to England, amongst other things, although I don't think he was entirely convinced he was going to play 1-to-1 with Staunton. Staunton entered the tournament of 1851, but didn't do very well. Well, we all know that feeling, Howard. The sedentary sport between 1914 and 1980. It's mostly about the rise of the Soviet school. Botvinnik playing at Nottingham 1936, equal with Capablanca. And further down the field, Erva and ex-champions Lasker and Alekhine. Yes, that was a wonderful tournament. I've seen some good ones. The Phillips and Drew in 1980, 92 and 84 in County Hall. But that doesn't detract from the fact that probably Nottingham 1936 was even stronger. There we are. It just gives a little background there. And there's the book again. If you see it around, it's in libraries more than in bookshops. And if it is in bookshops, it might be white. It might be white. The cover here is red, of course. But I've seen it in paperback in white. And here we have the daddy of them all, to misquote Dylan Thomas, a museum that should be in a museum. This is the history of chess by Professor H.J.R. Murray, and it was published in 1913. And it deals with many variants of chess to such an extreme extent that it almost comes as a relief to see a picture of some chessmen as ornate as that, just to take your mind off the fact, quite frankly, that it was a very long and convoluted history stemming from places like India and Persia and going all the way through medieval game, going all the way through. Well, there's something you don't see every day, a big chessboard. See that little guy? Look at that. Well, obviously, if you had a chessboard like that, you're doing rather well. You'd probably make your own. I think that's the best way of doing it. There's exactly the same picture as I showed you before, but you can see it again in black and white, which is nearly as thrilling, and it's Dutch. Here are various styles of chess boards. one at the bottom actually isn't a chessboard. I think it's Nine Man's Morris. I could be wrong. What do you make of that then? Actually, he's got the ball round the wrong way. It should be round there, shouldn't it? White on the right. I didn't know that. Stupid old Murray. Oh, well, this is rather more straightforward. Here we are. A flash of the Lewis Chessmen again. Looks like a child's colouring book. But for all of that, there we are. I think I've done all right. Get my little fingers out the way. And this takes us up to, as I said, 1913, and what he terms as Pillsbury and the Modernese Masters. And Pillsbury, dead before then, but nevertheless, he deals with Philidor, J.H. Sarrat, no doubt Steinitz and Pillsbury, and he mentions the British Chess Magazine, founded in 1881. Today, the longest established magazines are in England. The British Chess Magazine, Abroad, Schackweizung, 1846, and Strategie, 1867. Oh, there you are. The first newspaper, to have a chess column was the Liverpool Mercury in 1814, even before the Battle of Waterloo. How about that? And it mentions the tournament, which I mentioned before, where Staunton got knocked out very early. In those days, chess tournaments were invariably knockouts. These days, they're invariably Swisses, which means you don't get knocked out, you just play someone on a similar score. And at the end of the tournament, and you'll know in advance how many rounds you've got, the person with the most points is the winner. So that's pretty obvious, I suppose. But when imagination encouraged to adopt the older methods in a tournament, repeatedly taking a high position amongst the prize winners, we may be permitted to doubt whether the modern school is all that is claimed to be, or has said the last word upon the tactics of play. And on that note, we close, knowing, to quote the words of Irving Chernev, we are indeed playing as badly as ever. Thank you and good night.